Morning, family. How are we doing today? All right, we're dismissed. Okay. Have you ever played the game Gossip? Where sit in a circle, somebody comes up with a sentence, they share it with the person next to them, who then shares it with they whisper it to the person next to them, who whispers it to the person next to them. When it goes all the way around the circle, then you compare the message that started with the message that ended. And as it said, then hilarity ensues. Because never, and I've, especially when I was younger, played that game so often, never has the ending message ever matched the primary message. And so what people hear and what they say, although we assume it's pretty straightforward, it never is. As you know, communication is a huge issue. And I want to talk today about information lost in communication. And I want to use a couple of metaphors. And one is, if you take something and go to the copy machine and you make a copy, then you take the copy and make a copy, and then take that copy and make a copy, and then compare it to the original, you're going to see that it looks different. It's usually quite a bit pale in comparison, because information is getting lost. Every time that copier scans a generated copy, it doesn't see as much, and so it doesn't reproduce as much. In analog recording, this is non-digital recording, it's the same issue. If you make a copy of a recording, there is what is called signal loss. There's also what's referred to as distortion, or total harmonic distortion. Distortion is the change of the original image. Now, if you ever followed anything about recording or anything, you would hear about certain groups losing their master tape. The master tape is the one that all the copies used to be made from, whether it was records or tapes or whatever. And especially in analog recordings, every time a recording of a recording is made, you introduce more problems. It's been said that when the Beatles recorded A Day in the Life, it's a song that ends with several people hitting a chord just as hard as they could on several different instruments and then holding it. And it's held out longer than any other, but one of the things that they were doing in the recording booth, they kept turning the volume up, because obviously as they hit that chord and held it, it begins to decay. So they would turn the volume up, and it said, if you listen to that song with headphones, you can hear the air conditioner at Abbey Road Studios, because they had to turn it up so high, the microphones picked up the air conditioners. Now understand, when you design a recording studio, you design any other noise out. So for it to do that, and for the air conditioner to end up on the recording, it's pretty amazing. But what it illustrates is how difficult it is to make a recording, and that it be original, any copy that you make of it, because anything you receive is going to be a copy of the original. You don't get the original. And so the idea is you want it to be as true to form, and that's where the term hi-fi came up. And hi-fi is where the word Wi-Fi came up. Hi-fi means, it comes using a Latin word, fidelity, high fidelity. Fidelity, semper fidelis, it's faithful. So the idea is, if something is hi-fi, it is faithful, highly faithful. It's not perfect, because there's always signal loss. And it's signal loss that I want us to talk about, because what we are involved in right now is the transfer of a signal, information, okay? And it's going to be lost in communication. It's going to be lost in hearing. What I say today, only a certain amount of that will you take away. I don't know what would be considered success. Would it be 50%? Would it be 100%? Would it be that after lunch you could remember anything I said? Signal loss is when information, sound, whatever is transferred, there's always loss of signal. Signal being the original sound, the original words, etc. So I want you to imagine it this way. With 100% signal, 95% is as good a copy as you will get. Just say that for argumentative reasons. Total harmonic distortion measures how much of the signal gets changed from the time it's recorded to when it's copied. And so if the original signal is 100% information, distortion accounts for 5% loss of signal, then the receiver is only receiving 95% of that message. Now, if a person shares that message that they got, which is only 95% of the original, the third person is going to receive 95% of 95%, or 90%. That's signal loss. Are you following me so far? Every time a message is copied or transferred, it's like the game gossip. Every time somebody whispered something, there was loss of information. There was loss of signal. Because that's what happens in communication. What comes from your mouth, I do not hear totally accurately. My brain doesn't process it totally accurately. That's signal loss. That's harmonic distortion of the message. So the third generation is going to receive 90% of the original message, and when they pass it on, it's going to be 85%. You can see when you've gone 10 generations, I share it with you, you share it with someone else, they share it with someone else. When that's done 10 times, half the message is gone. And that's exactly what happens in the game. Each generation continues signal loss. Guys, the messages that you have heard, that you, as you're growing up, as you're developing, whatever those messages are, including messages from the Word of God, when you passed on to your children, or are passing on to your children what you have received, your children are going to suffer from signal loss because you don't remember it all. Some of the message that you received, you are not reporting accurately. They have become distorted. Now, this is important because God talks about how important it is to teach from generation to generation to generation. The passage that Gabriel read. Everybody turn and look at him and think, happy birthday. Think it, don't say it, but turn and look at Gabriel. It's his birthday today. He told me today he's officially mature. No, he didn't say that. I put it on him. All right, signal loss in teaching. In education, testing identifies how much of the teacher's instruction, i.e. the signal, was received. In other words, how much was learned. If communication were perfect, each student would score 100 on each test. They have learned everything that the teacher said, and they can repeat everything that the teacher said. Hypothetically, a student who scores 85%, and we consider that good, right? That's a fairly good grade. A student who scores 85% has learned 85% of what they've been tested over. We have signal loss. We have educational loss. That student can only teach from a reduced volume of knowledge. The point of all of this is when you teach your children from the Bible, there is distortion. There is signal loss. Now, let me give you a little bit of a preview. The solution to that is to teach your children not only from the Bible, but to teach them to go to the Bible. That's the original recording. As anyone teaches them from that, there will be signal loss and there will be distortion because we are human. Now let's go back to that passage, and I want you to see God's solution for this signal loss. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. That's signal. I am presenting to you information. And whether it's audio, whether it's video, whether it's reading, whether it's heard, it's all information. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and you shall talk of them of when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. When are you not teaching them according to this? Guys, this is not a family activity. If you read Bible stories to your children at night, great. I am very supportive of that. I'm very encouraging of that. But you have not completed your task by doing simply that. What God is saying is all of the time that you are with your children are teachable moments if you are teaching them. And if your mind is on transferring to them spirituality, knowledge of God, etc., then you're constantly doing that. And that's what he's saying. I want you to constantly teach. I want you to constantly talk. Now let me ask you, if you constantly do that, will some of it become repetitive? Absolutely. And if it's repetitive, there's a greater chance that less signal will be lost. That's why the old saying, repetition is the mother of learning. Now, not only is there signal loss, there's interference. Does anybody in here remember the old days of analog telephone? When the further the long distance, do you remember how much long distance used to cost? We take all that for granted. And if you were calling from here to New York, sometimes you would have to yell because you would hear so much static and they sounded so far away because that signal had to run on wires all the way from there to you. And because it did that, the wires themselves have resistance. And what they introduce is interference. And originally, telephone was introduced like telegraph. And they would have bare wires, and they would run them on poles. And sometimes you would have signal jump from one wire to the other. And so you might be talking to Aunt Mary, and all of a sudden you hear another conversation on your phone line. Interference. Distortion is a distortion of the message. Interference is including things into the message that don't belong. It's additional information that's extraneous. When the Beatles recorded A Day in the Life, the recording was interfered with by the air conditioning system. If the motor on a tape recorder is loud enough, it can be heard on the recording. That's interference. And I want you to understand that audiophiles, people that love audio and that love recording, this drives them nuts. How do you get a pure recording without any extraneous noise, without any interference? And it's impossible. Because the very things that are causing the recording are introducing interference themselves. Interference is unintended noise that is added to a signal. It distorts or perverts the sound or the signal. It distorts the information. So we've got harmonic distortion from just trying to teach our kids, and then we've got interference. Extra information that doesn't belong in the recording. It doesn't belong in this teaching situation. Where does that come from? Exactly. Social media, neighbors, news, fake news, on and on and on. It's interference. It gets added to the message, and the message gets perverted or distorted. Culture offers increasing signal interference to God's teachings. So God's teaching is not heard as well, and it doesn't stand out. I want to suggest to you, in a culture transferring information from God, there is more distortion than there is original information. And not the least of that comes from churches. Now, for this very reason also, applying all diligence in your faith. Supply moral excellence. And in your moral excellence, knowledge. Diligence. Did you notice diligently teach your children? Here's diligently pursuing moral excellence and adding to that knowledge. That is, I've got to get signal. I've got to get information from God. For the time will come and they will not endure sound doctrine, but wanting to have their ears tickled, they will accumulate for themselves teachers in accordance to their own desires, who will turn their ears from the truth and will turn aside to myths. There is interference. Now, God said this, but you need to know this. Or you need to know this in order to understand this. That's interference. And guys, I want to suggest to you in the United States, in present culture, we're turning more to interference than we are the original signal. And the interference is coming. You can watch it on TV all the time. And it's words that didn't come from God. It's teachings that didn't come from God, have no basis in God, but they're included in messages. They're included in writing. They're included in sermons, etc. Interference. And it's confusing. Because how do I get the original message if A, there's distortion, and B, if there's interference, if there's other voices that are coming onto the phone line? When we do not pass along the teachings of the Bible, the signal gets lost. Since there is signal loss when we teach, we must boost the signal to overcome distortion. I've got to speak more. I've got to raise the volume, not of my voice, the volume of the transfer of information. You see, if my children are going to get 95% of what I teach, I need to teach 150%, so hopefully they'll get 98%. I've got to boost the signal in hopes that they will get more of the signal. Now again, I've got to teach them to go to the audio recordings that were original. I've got to teach them to go to the written recordings that are the originals, and that's right here. But in teaching them what it says, I also need to be teaching them of how to read what it says, how to know what it says for themselves. In a time when children are receiving less teaching, we have a need to boost the volume. We got a real conundrum here. We got a real problem. Because when each generation receives less of the signal due to signal loss, distortion, interference, we've got to increase, but what's happening is just the opposite. There's a decrease of it. And there's an arrogance that if I hear it once, I've got it. Yet if we hear it once and are tested over it, we find out by our test score how much we didn't get. If I went to Coy as a practicing physician, I'm as much interested in the days that he missed as the days that he was there. Steve, we need to operate on your appendix. Now, I wasn't present that day, but I'll give it my best shot. That's signal loss. Add to that interference from the world that we've talked about. Add to that interference of fake news Christianity. And there's so much of that. We're surrounded with it. Become very critical of what you listen to. Become very critical of the Christian music that you listen to. Become very critical, and I don't mean just sit there and make fun of it. I'm saying listen to what it says. Compare that to the master tapes and see if it is indeed consistent. And you're going to find a lot of problems. Here are some examples of what I call soft teachings that's happening. And I just took this right off the internet of what are popular things that are being taught. Fighting isolation, biblical fathering and leading, the discontented heart, getting back to grace, counting it all joy, living intentionally. What about how not to go to hell? What about the things that God wants to make sure that you're doing right now? What about how to stand out as pure in an impure world? But see, that's going back to the old tapes. What's happened, there's a lot of interference. They're not wrong per se. What they do is they just interfere with the underlying message, and that is, do not depart from the teachings that I have given you to other things, to mythologies, to things that maybe are associated to what's associated to what's associated. These are all signal loss subjects. You need to get back to the original, the master tapes. So we need to boost the signal. That means as much biblical instruction as we can find. That means take advantage of every instructional opportunity. Are your children learning from you every day? Are your grandchildren learning from you every day? Are you doing it when you rise up, when you sit down, when you walk along the way, when you put them to bed, when you're having meals with one another? Boost the signal. Take advantage. Now also, get others involved. Bring them to class. Bring them to vacation Bible school. Bring them to camp. Bring them to youth activities. Bring them to every opportunity that you have. Why? Because signal is going to be lost. You've got to boost the signal. Because not only is there signal loss, there is so much interference with truth. In fact, in a culture that has given up on truth. Increase the signal at home in a time where decreasing is the norm. There's less teaching at home. There's less Bible reading at home. There's less family just talking about what God said. Do you do that at meals? Do you do that at bedtime? Do you do that when you rise up? Do you do that when you're driving somewhere? Are you sharing God's design and God's will? Plan for your children to have more opportunities to learn than you had, just to offset distortion. Just with the hopes that they'll get as much as you got. But the signal has to be boosted for them to get close to what you got. But what you got was not complete because of the distortion involved in yours, because of the signal loss that we've talked about. What we do with our families is a mentorship, not a family activity. It's not like a scheduled family devo, nothing wrong with that. That we do that once and we're good. Now we can talk about football, now we can talk about whatever. No. This is a mentorship. This is developing disciples by being disciples. What do disciples talk about? What they're sold out to. What do disciples of Jesus talk about? Who they're sold out to. Repetition, repetition, repetition. Jesus told his apostles 3 times, meet me at this mountain. 3 times. Peter said, I'm not telling you anything new. I'm writing to you to stir up remembrance. Why does he need to stir up remembrance? Why is he telling them what they already know? Because signal loss. They forget. They focus on other things. So we need to be reminded. So the fact that you've heard it before is not the point. The fact that you're being reminded is we're boosting the signal in hopes that in the future you won't forget. But if you do forget, we're going to bring it back to your mind. Peter didn't write anything new in both of his books. And he said that in both of them. I am writing to remind you, because we tend to get away from the signal, whether through distortion, whether through just memory lapse. So let's conclude where we started. How do we prevent loss of signal? How do we prevent or fight distortion, signal loss, interference? How do we boost the signal? Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I'm commanding you today shall be on your heart. Now there's the preamble. You got to love him first. You don't talk about things you don't care about. You don't talk about things that are not important to you. Hang around a photographer, you're going to hear about photography. Hang around someone that remodels cars, you're going to hear about cars. And they don't sit there and worry about, oh, how can I introduce cars into this discussion? They just do. Because they're sold out on it. And he said, when you're sold out on me, this will be a lot easier. But here's what I want you to do. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. And you shall teach them diligently to your sons. And shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. In other words, keep boosting the signal, because you're losing signal. You're constantly losing signal. And the way to battle that is to boost the signal. And when you hear, Dad, not again. All right, then tell me what I'm about to say to you, Junior. And if Junior can parrot your words 100%, then you're ready to repeat your words. See, it never ends. It never ends. But when he can parrot them 100%, there is signal. Now you encourage him to take that back to the original master tapes and make sure that it's accurate. Make sure that the signal has been restored. And now it is not analog, it's digital. It's pure. Brothers and sisters, we live in tough times, and I understand that. And I am the greatest fan of every parent and every family that's living and battling these times. I am on your team. What you are doing with your children is incredibly important, and I'm your biggest fan. Boost the signal. Boost the signal. Boost the signal. And be diligent in that. But it starts with, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Do you? With all your soul? With all your might? Do you? If not, I want to invite you to take up the mantle. I want to invite you to do so. That's the only chance your children will have. How is your walk? Is it him first? Is it in the light? Is it the upward call? Then for you, boosting the signal is just becoming more creative. If it's not, boosting the signal to you is a life transformation. And we present to you this morning the opportunity for that transformation. Can we talk with you about your relationship with God through Christ Jesus? There'll be men at the back, men at the front. Let's talk.